Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Crossing the Goal Line here on TriStateFootball.com. Greg Shoemaker and myself, Brandon Saho, here to talk about teams on the bubble right in the middle of the season. Going to see who's going to make the playoffs or who's not and what we think about that. Starting in the GCL South, Greg, what do you think about the Elder Panthers this year?
Well, they've got a tough road to hoe right now, Brandon. I mean, looking at their schedule, they got St. X coming up. That's a home game. They might be able to get them in a letdown game, after their big win over Moeller. But then again, the Panthers got Moeller coming up after St. X, and then Winton Woods comes to town, and Winton Woods is hot right now. They're proving that they can stop the running game, which will mean that the Panthers will have to throw the ball, which they're pretty adept to. They could win that one. Then after that, they go over to Highlands. So you're looking at possibly 4 straight losses. However, right now, Elder is in a position that, they control their own destiny.
Right.
And Brandon, as we're looking at the GCL South, why don't we take a look at your school, the LaSalle Lancers?
Yeah, LaSalle, they started off the season right now 4-1 after the first 5 weeks. They're number 10 in the Harbin rankings, but they're nowhere out of the trenches. They have a tough schedule, just like the Elder Panthers, to go still. They have Moeller and St. X the next 2 weeks at home. Then they go on the road up to Michigan to play Brother Rice, a powerhouse up there. And they go to Columbus to play St. Francis de Sales and end the season against the Elder Panthers. It's going to be a tough road for LaSalle, but I think if they want to get in, they have to win 3 of those games, or they're not going to be able to stay at that inside that top 8 spot in the Harbin rankings. Moving on to some other schools in Division I. Greg, a little smaller. What do you think about that Lebanon squad?
Lebanon's done everything they're supposed to do this far or up to this point of the season. They've got Xenia coming up this week. Xenia's got a lot of speed. They're not a team that can handle the power that Lebanon has. So when it comes down to it, the last 2 games of the year against Miamisburg, which they should win, it's going to come down to that final week against Springboro, who's undefeated. Both of those teams could get into the playoffs if Springboro remains undefeated and Lebanon wins that game in week 10. So they've got their work. They're still on the outside looking in. They were number 9 in the Harbins before this weekend's games. They've still got some work to do, but their schedule is conducive to them going no worse than really 8-2 on the year. So I like them. And Brandon, let's go back a little bit. We'll talk another small school right there on the bubble. How about Loveland?
Yeah, Loveland, the Tigers haven't been in the playoffs since 2002, but they're hoping to change that this year. Right now, they're sitting at the number 8 spot in the Harbin rankings, but they have some big games ahead against Anderson, that Winton Woods team we just talked about, and also the number 1 team in Division II, Turpin. Once again, I think this team has to win 2 out of 3 of those games, especially against Winton Woods and Turpin. Those are 2 really well-coached and great teams so far this year. And I think the Tigers can get in. They're 4-1 right now. If they can win 2 of those games, I think they got a real shot staying inside that top 8. And now we're going to move into the GMC. Greg, we saw team Mason last week. What do you think about the Comets?
Mason's got the tough road to hoe, but I like their toughness on defense. They've got Colerain this weekend. That's always a situation. Colerain always has that one game every year where they sort of aren't all there and in a funk, and Mason is hoping they catch them in that funk this week. It is a home game for Mason. Then 2 weeks later, they've got Lakota East, and that's another big game on the schedule because Lakota East is ahead of them in Harbin points right now. So that's a good one. And then at the end of the year, they always have their rivalry game in the GMC to close the season off with Sycamore. Last year they beat Sycamore because Sycamore had already tied up a playoff spot and rested their starters. So if that comes down to that situation again, and Sycamore being 4-1 already, they could be 8-1 and already in the playoffs and secured their home game. Mason may luck into having a situation where they're playing second stringers in week 10 again, which could aid them. But again, getting past Colerain this week is going to be the tough thing. If they can do that, then I think they got a decent shot at getting themselves back in the playoff hunt. Let's stay in the GMC, Brandon, and let's talk about that team I was talking about a little bit earlier, Lakota East.
Yeah, the Thunderbirds, Greg, we all know, never been to the playoffs. But this year, I think they really got an opportunity where they can change it. They're sitting at 4-1. They're in I believe around 7 in the Harbin rankings, but they got a tough schedule too. Just like Mason, they play Sycamore at home, but then they have to go on the road to the Mason Comets and to Lakota West to end the season. And just like I said about Lovin, this team needs to win 2 of those games, in my opinion, to stay in the hunt for a playoff berth, and they can do it. But there's tons of teams in the GMC conference that are fighting for those spots, along with the GCL schools and the small schools like Loveland and Lebanon. So for all the latest high school football news, check out TriStateFootball.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at TSFootball.